There you go. I did it for you. I did it for
We're on
you.
our state climate action talk show.
Yes.
Hey!
Oh.
Oh! What?
I should have. I really should have.
Hey!
Sure. Look at the camera real quick.
Y'all ready?
Good morning, folks. Morning. Thank you, Susan. Good morning. We all awake. We've made it through the badge lines. We made it on the bus. And here we are. So welcome to In the Laboratories of Democracy, How States Will Advance Climate Action Through Federal Funds. I'm Clara Summers. I'm the Climate and Energy Manager for the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, or NCEL. NCEL is a nationwide network of over 1,000 legislators across all U.S. states who focus on shared learning and action on environmental policy issues. So we connect legislators with experts as well as with each other, because peer learning is really an excellent way to go, for solutions and best practices on environmental policy issues. And if your state legislator is not already a member, you should have them reach out to us, because we would love to welcome them into the fold. And I'll just add, we are nonprofit, nonpartisan, and non-lobby. So it's really a space for shared education and looking for best practices. And I am thrilled to be joined here on stage with several state legislators from very different contexts in the U.S., but all of whom are committed to climate action in their own ways. And in a moment, I will turn the mic over to them to introduce themselves. But first, to give a little bit of context for where we are all at. If you are American, I'm sure you've been very excited about or hearing a lot about the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan infrastructure law that were passed in the past year. And this really is, and I'm not going to say unprecedented because I'm tired of that word, but it's a very new opportunity and a wonderful chance for states to have federal partners, because when Trump removed the U.S. from the Paris Agreement way back when, that's when this America is All In coalition was formed. And states were big leaders in that. And I think it's really important for those who are less familiar with the American landscape to recognize how much power states have to set their climate policy agenda, as well as realize that many U.S. states have the same emissions and economic impact as countries in other parts of the world. So it really does make a difference when a state passes an emissions reduction target, or commits to 100% renewable energy, or signs onto the Clean Car Standard, or defines which groups constitute environmental justice communities for targeted benefits and funding. That makes a difference when a state does it. And the states have been learning from each other, and the federal government has been learning from states, and that learning goes both ways. So the IRA just recently passed has the potential to reduce national emissions by 44% below 2005 levels by 2030. And combined with the bipartisan infrastructure law, as I said, this is a great opportunity. At the same time, that word potential to reduce emissions is really important, potential, because it requires implementation, and that's where state and local governments come in. So with that, you're going to hear from some of our state leaders here who are working on that implementation, hear their ideas and what they've already been doing on climate action and climate justice issues. So I will turn it over first to Representative Carrie Hamilton of Indiana, then Representative Chris Rabb of Pennsylvania, and then Senator Liz Lovelit of Washington State. So please go ahead and introduce yourself and share how your state is already taking climate action, if at all.
Thank you so much, Claire. It's a real pleasure to be here in Sharm el-Sheikh with you, and I just want to thank the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators for providing all of this incredible programming throughout COP for several state legislators, and all of the work you do throughout the year, because I participate in several working groups, or at least I have over the last few years. It's really important work. Okay, right here. There we go. All right. I was thanking NCL for the incredible work they do. And now just a quick introduction about myself. So I represent the north side of Indianapolis, kind of a blue dot in a very red state with a triumvirate red government. And my background is in the environmental field. I've worked in the environmental field on air quality, energy efficiency, circular economy, toxics reductions, and climate issues for all of those years in government, NGO, consulting. And now, actually, in Indiana, we have a part-time legislature, and I, very much part-time, and I am working for a climate tech company. So you can imagine, since I already introduced myself as a legislator from Indiana, that I'm kind of an uphill battle a lot of the time on climate issues. So my day job creates a little balance in my life. But at the State House, I do work really hard across the aisle to find opportunities to move the needle. When it comes to this first question about IRA in particular, I have drafted, or it's being drafted, legislation to enable a green bank for the state of Indiana. That is something that's supported by IRA, and I look forward to having conversations with folks on both sides of the aisle to try to move that forward. It seems like something we might be able to accomplish this year. And I have plenty of other things to talk about later. I'll hand it off to Chris.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm State Representative Chris Rabb, and I'm a Chidelphian. I was born and raised in the small town of Chicago, Illinois, and embraced Philadelphia as my home, where I serve 65,000 people, Northwest Philly, in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. It's the largest full-time state legislature in the country, 13 million Pennsylvanians, and it is where the first oil well was established in Northwest Pennsylvania. It is the second largest producer of fracked gas, coal, nukes. So it's a net energy exporter. And it is also a state where there are more lobbyists than legislators, where there are no political campaign contribution limits. So I could get $1 billion from any of you extremely wealthy people out here in the audience. I'm not asking, I'm just saying that that could happen and it would be legal, which is a corrosive aspect of the electoral process and the governmental process in our state. And it impacts energy policy. So I say that as a tree hugger. I say that as a board member of the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, and as the member of the Energy Supply Task Force in the National Conference of State Legislators, as well as a founding member of the Pennsylvania Climate Caucus. So I'm very interested in energy and environmental policy, and I'm really appreciative to be here to have this conversation, because I'm told that we are called subnational leaders. I've been called a subversive leader, but I've never been called a subnational. Never happened until I had to go to Egypt to be called that. And I've been called many things. But I'm glad to be here because states are indeed where many things happen, and sometimes good things happen. In our states, Indiana and Pennsylvania, not so much. And that has a lot to do with politics, frankly, and systems that allow for the seemingly intransigence of meaningful progress around these issues because of moneyed interests. So I had to decide how controversial I wanted to be when I come here and speak, but I think it's important that no matter how deep we dive into these issues, that there's some things that a lot of people may nod their head about, but not enough people actually express. So I'm here to publicly oppose greenwashing. Yeah? All right, okay, I want to know what audience I'm talking to here. I do want to get home, but I got to be honest while I'm here. and also just understanding that all of this, and I'm going to end on this, it's all interconnected. The awfulness of what we are experiencing, and particularly those folks who are in the global south, and for those of us who are descendant of the victims of settler colonization, all of this is related. All of it's related. You can't talk about the environment, climate action, energy policy without talking about systems of oppression. You can't do it, and you shouldn't do it. And if we have a meaningful conversation, particularly on the international level, without talking about that, we're part of the problem. So I'm going to just leave that there for now. Liz.
Hey, everybody. I got 1 second of play on it.
Try that.
1 second on that mic, and it was like, no more, no more. Hi, I'm Liz Lovelet. I'm a senator in Washington State. I represent an area, I live in a little town on a little island, Anacortes, Washington, and I'm there at the intersection of half of the, or actually 2/3 of the oil refining in our state, and the last of our beloved southern resident killer whale. So the relationship between climate and our economy and the way that we move forward is very personal to me. So I want to take it back as we talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. I want to take it back to the original question around the Paris Accords. So as a city council member in Anacortes, I helped co-sponsor a resolution for our city to maintain the goals and targets of the Paris Climate Accord at the local level. So the reason I bring that up is to show that it can happen at the city level, it can happen at the county level, it can happen at the state level, and I'm so proud to be part of a team in the Washington State Legislature that is centering climate in all of the work that we do. So I'm Vice Chair of Energy and Environment. I work on housing and local government issues on that committee. I chair a ferry legislator caucus for transportation, and some of the ways that we're going to thread the needle between the federal expenditures that we have and the ability for the locals to use it, for me, is one of my most beloved subjects, which is our ferry system. We have the second largest ferry system in the world in Washington State, and they are one of our largest carbon emitters in our state family. So I've been working really hard over the last several years to try to move to a point where we can direct funding towards hybridizing our ferry fleet, electrifying our terminals, to ensure that not only are those emissions being reduced on the long haul of capitalizing vessels, but that we're also making sure that our engines are quieter for our native species that are underwater. I think there's going to be so many ways that we're going to be able to ensure that we are weatherizing homes, making sure that low-income folks have the ability to pay their energy bills in the face of ongoing energy crisis. I'm really proud of our transportation package that we bookmarked some of this Inflation Reduction money to be able to make it so that every kid in Washington State can ride all of our public transit for free. Because we want to make sure that the next generation is ready to ride transit and make it normalize it. We don't want them to turn 16 and run right to a car. We want them to be riding the bus. We want them to be riding the ferries for free. So really proud of the work that our colleagues have done to come together and make sure that this money is spent in meaningful ways, in targeted places, and that we're getting those first dollars into the communities that need it the most, that deserve it the most, and that have borne the brunt of our policies of the past.
Thank you all. Yes, agreed. And we were talking earlier as someone who spent a lot of my childhood in Washington State and was reliant on the ferries and the buses for school. That's a big deal. So that keeps us up really well for our next question, which is the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Now law. Both have a huge range of provisions, and I'm curious to hear more from you all, which ones you hope to take advantage of, just to give a brief scene setting for those who maybe haven't read the entire bill. But there is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which provides seed money for creating and continuing to finance green banks or similar financing mechanisms at state and local levels. Through EPA, there are also climate pollution reduction grants plans. So what's especially exciting about these plans is that every state an entity in every state has the opportunity to create a proposal with this EPA grant money for how they would pursue climate justice in vulnerable communities and overburdened and underserved communities, both in terms of community support and development and empowerment, as well as having this co-benefit of reducing emissions and other climate co-pollutants. I'll also note that there was a lot of money for school bus electrification in the infrastructure law, as well as, yes, snaps for that, as well as really extensive buildings weatherization provisions in the IRA that allow states to really invest money in weatherization and energy efficiency and upgrading appliances away from polluting, indoor polluting appliances. So I'm curious to hear from you all, either from those things I've just listed or other opportunities in the bill, what most excites you and what you hope to implement in your own state.
So I mentioned earlier green bank enabling legislation. We don't have that yet in Indiana. So I think that is possibly an area.
Thank you. Is that working? I think the green bank enabling legislation is something we might be able to accomplish in Indiana in a tough climate for climate legislation. You mentioned the school buses dollars to electrify, and we do have some money has already flowed to some of our schools. I've reached out. I think from that perspective, I'm not going to see a clear legislative opportunity to engage on that issue, but make sure as a legislator I know that my locals are aware of opportunities to apply, work together to get some more dollars into our state, into my community in particular. You spoke about environmental justice dollars, and I think there is an opportunity there that my state environmental agency needs to be encouraged to work towards. I think this IRA in particular provides some new momentum for our environmental agency to engage on issues they haven't engaged on before, that it might create an opportunity in a red state to start to do this work because it's money flowing towards us, right? And I don't think there's going to be pushback towards that. So I'm a little bit hopeful there. It's a really hard challenge. I mean, some of the energy efficiency building support is around codes. I've been trying for years to get our codes updated. They're wildly behind. Yeah, building codes, efficiency codes. I don't think we're going to make progress there. I just don't. I'm realistic. I'm not going to spin my wheels on that one. There is some money for the built environment when it comes to bike and pedestrian connectivity and safety and access. And I will share that that is an area where I found a lot of bipartisan support. In early 2020, I formed a bipartisan bicameral legislative trails caucus. And when the recovery money came out in early 21, we were able to secure the first ever state legislative budget line item for trails, $60 million. So I'm working to grow that bipartisan work, more safe intersections, et cetera, grow this conversation that then feeds into transit and multimodal and connectivity and a bigger conversation that we have not had in the Indiana State House.
So, billions of dollars, billions and billions of dollars from our federal government flowing freely like the rivers. What we do as states can be aggressively wonderful or deeply problematic, and everywhere in between, depending on what state you're in, the politics of that state, the various interests that influence legislators in industry and beyond, and the blessing and the curse of the Inflation Reduction Act is that there's a certain level of vagary where what the money can be used for is pretty wide open. And again, that's good because you have that flexibility and the creativity, but creativity is not always used in service of justice, is it? So my concern in Pennsylvania is that we squander access to this money and do things that don't get to the root of the problem. Because my conservative colleagues will say, oh, you know, the problem is you Democrats like to throw money at the issue. And that's not the, you know, and that's not how you get stuff done. Of course, there are no solutions that they offer, void of money. But my concern is that if the work we seek to do with these federal funds is not centered on equity, it will fail. And by failure, there are many different ways to fail. One of the failures I'm most concerned about is expanding structural inequality, because you can do this in a way that benefits the folks who are already doing okay. Now they'll do better, and you leave the folks who are on the fence lines and the front lines who don't have the political power and do not have the political capital and economic capital to make the change that benefits everyone. So if you don't believe that what helps the most vulnerable people in society helps everyone, I'm not going to trust your leadership. You know, I think Hillary Clinton would say, you know, if anything you do for girls is going to benefit everyone, that same kind of mindset. You know, my folks have been in the United States for many, many generations. All 16 of my great-great-grandparents were born into slavery. The effects of those institutions on everything impact everyone. Everything, inclusive of environmental and energy policy. So if we can't talk about the fundamental issues that have created all of these catastrophes, then it really doesn't matter how much the Biden administration is investing. And that's a difficult conversation to have. And oftentimes in environments like, well, I couldn't say environments like this because I've never been in an environment like this before, but in a lot of rooms, we avoid the difficult conversations. So what I want to say here is, when we decide as states and as community leaders in our state, not just legislators, but stakeholders, community stakeholders, we have to have the difficult conversations. We have to be able to connect the dots between seemingly random things and how it influences climate action and resiliency and all of these things. And if we don't, we're just going to have a whole lot of money that will not actually address the issue. The upside, because I figure I probably should say something positive at some point. Maybe I'll sneak something. It's not a requirement. It's not. Oh, this is, oh goodness gracious. No wonder you invited me. The upside is, if you find a way to craft a narrative that is inclusive, that is also truth-telling about our shared history and the necessity for a shared intertwined fate, that's where the magic will happen. That's where the magic will happen. If you can connect the fate of coal workers to tree huggers, you're on to something. In my state, I'm getting a little excited now. There is an awful expression. Awful expression. Are there any Americans here? Raise your hand, I'm just curious. Okay, all right, a few of you, all right. So the joke that I find deeply offensive is that in between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh is Kentucky. And the reason I never laugh at that is because my people are from Kentucky. So I find that deeply problematic. Because you know what? People in Kentucky love their families too. And there's this, I was going to say implicit, pretty explicit, that if you live in a rural community, you are less than. that you are a butt of a joke. And I've only known cities, and yet I find it deeply offensive. If we think that we can talk, and it's funny, it's a joke that we can make fun of rural communities, we're part of the problem. So whether it's ethnic or cultural, historical, geographic, religious, gender-based, class, whatever, if we can't find a way to connect in good faith and be truth tellers, right? Not just wash over all the bad stuff, but actually lean in and have those conversations, this money will be a godsend. Okay, enough truth telling. All right, thank you very much. Good night.
Don't drop the mic yet. Don't drop the mic. That was God saying they agreed. So being one of 2 rural Democrats in my caucus, actually we'll now have 3, which I'm very excited about. When we look at especially democratically controlled legislatures, they tend to come mostly from urban areas, but the rural areas being underrepresented in the caucus room is a real issue because this is where the agriculture happens, this is where the forestry happens, this is where a lot of the floodplain areas are. So in terms of trying to figure out how we direct these funds in a way that is meaningful for folks, there's the equity that's on the environmental justice side, which we're really fortunate in Washington State. First of all, we're national leaders. We have a Clean Energy Transformation Act. We have a price on carbon. We have a low carbon fuel standard. We have all of these pieces in place, but importantly, we have passed the Healthy Environment for All Act, otherwise known as the HEAL Act. And what that does is it embeds environmental justice into 9 of our most important state agencies and ensures that we have an environmental justice task force to evaluate the efficacy of our policies and to ensure that where we're directing investments is meaningful to those frontline communities rather than coming in and saying, this is what we think you need. It allows them to come back and say, this is what we know we need. And so when it comes to some of these investments, it's not just transit, it's not just, kind of the higher level things that make for big, sexy headlines. That weatherization money is transformative. When you think about not only reducing people's energy bills and consumption, but also thinking about indoor air quality, Western Washington has been on fire for the first time ever. Right? So now we have a fire season. We have 5 seasons now, spring, summer, winter, fall, and the fire season, where we're all dealing with this air quality that has been some of the poorest in the world. And folks that are in houses that have leaky windows, leaky doors, that are already in an area with high traffic pollution and other criterion pollutants are going to be bearing the brunt in the form of health outcomes. So the HEAL Act actually has mapped out across Washington State where those criterion pollutants are, kind of the root causes and the health outcomes that are associated with it. So we have a way to tie metrics and outcomes to where our investments are going. So we have it on the built environment side, we have it on the transportation side, and then we have it on the natural adaptive measures side. I was really pleased to have, with almost unanimous bipartisan support, a bill that I sponsored this last session that will help remediate 10,000 acres of kelp and eelgrass in the Puget Sound area. These are the places where our juvenile salmon come to life before they go up the river, which enables our orca to eventually have food downstream in a couple of years. It makes it so that we have the most incredible natural carbon sink available in these seagrasses that have the ability to pull that carbon and help aid in reducing ocean acidification. So all of these investments are going to go in really targeted ways. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention my personal favorite, State Bank, National Infrastructure Bank, Green Bank. I love it. I want it. We should all want it. We should all be contacting our Congress members to get it, because here's the deal. One-time appropriations are hard fought. We arm wrestle over it, we kvetch over the details, but infrastructure is a forever problem. You get done paving that road, and guess what? 20 years from now, you're going to need to repave it. You build a boat for your ferry system, and guess what? 20 years from now, it's going to need to be retired, and you're going to need to build a new boat. So ensuring that those jobs are in your state, ensuring that those dollars are flowing in a way that enables us to take care of infrastructure as the forever issue that it is absolutely key to making sure that these initial investments are not just one-time investments, and then we find ourselves in the exact same situation 20 years from now without having that appropriation. Because, you know, we all see it. If all of you Americans, you watch what happens at the federal level, and it is depressing. Right? Like, we just think everybody's just fighting with each other. It's this big sandbox wrestling match. But when it comes down to it, if we can all row in the same direction to say that infrastructure is climate money, that housing is climate money, and that having a replenishing financial mechanism to ensure that those are being delivered equitably. I mean, I'm from a small town. It's a fairly affluent small town because of those aforementioned refineries. But there's small towns all across Washington state. Their tax base is just too low to keep their roads paved. They can barely keep their public safety dollars. So making sure that this Green Bank proposal that's going through is tied to our state infrastructure bank proposal and to the National Infrastructure Bank proposal is going to be key to the longevity of really problem solving on the long term.
Thank you. And I want to underline the points that you have all made about how you have created this state infrastructure in order to receive what's now coming through the federal government. And it's important to recognize that all of the policy mechanisms that these folks have been mentioning at the state level have been in development for a while, and in many ways the federal government, these new federal laws are inspired by work at the state level. So like the new federal Justice 40 initiative to direct 40% of investments towards overburdened and underserved communities is in many ways inspired by work of the states. New York has a law that directs a minimum of 35% with a goal of 40% towards overburdened and underserved communities. We have states like New Jersey that has a cumulative impacts bill. And we have states like Massachusetts that has written a definition of environmental justice community into statute. So that's these are your leaders here who are also inspiring work at the federal level that has now been able to become a great partner in this work. So I want to also take us on another tack that you all have alluded to. And we are a nonpartisan organization, and it is also no secret that there are very severe partisan divides in this country, or in our country, not necessarily Egypt, in the United States. And so I'm curious to hear from you all about what strategies you have for reaching across the aisle and getting climate justice work done with your colleagues on the other side of the aisle. So the toughest nut to crack at this table, I think Indiana's worse than Pennsylvania when it comes to the level of the challenge. I already mentioned the trails work. I mean, that is something that has really brought us together around an issue that we never, of course, say the words climate change, but it really is that built environment, critical built environment for climate reducing carbon as we move around our communities. So I will say, we are all just people at that legislature, and those relationships that I build in that Trails Caucus flow through to other conversations I have. So thinking about, well, let me back up. So in Indiana, as I'm sure most of you know, I think almost everybody raised their hands that you are from the United States. I hope we have a couple of guests that aren't, but I think you already did, yeah. Indiana is a major manufacturing state, and we have significant auto manufacturing, well over 100,000 direct jobs in auto manufacturing. And 3 years ago, I offered a resolution that would have created a climate change task force. Now, the resolution did not have climate change in its name, but I was able to get a hearing because of a relationship I had. The Republican chair of the Environmental Affairs Committee was retiring, and my climate change, not called climate change bill, was the last bill he ever heard in his committee. That bill included language to bring auto manufacturing to the table to talk about how to retool that industry so that we keep those good jobs in Indiana, making that connection to great jobs in our state. So jump to the next year. Of course, we got a no vote hearing. I got a no vote hearing. Folks from all over the state, youth climate activists and others came, and academics came, and we're excited to have a chance to speak at the State House. Then we didn't get a vote, and then we moved on.
we took that auto conversation to create, in the next year, I reached out to a Republican colleague who I co-authored a bill to create the Indiana Electric Vehicle Product Commission. And our work, we're now a year into that with a first report, which is fairly groundbreaking, I'm learning, from other states that have reached out to us to mirror what we're doing. As we look to the workforce challenges, as we want to retool that industry, on the ground opportunities in our communities to grow those jobs. Are we ready? Do we have the technology in place? Do we have the workforce pipeline in place? Not just on the ground today, but pipeline. We are also a battery innovation hub. So we have all of this opportunity in our state. And bringing this conversation together leads to related conversations that help us get to a broader decarbonization conversation, because obviously EVs are going to be built, and whether or not they're built in Indiana or not doesn't really help the environment. But when an auto manufacturer wants to bring $2 billion to grow a facility in Kokomo, Indiana, and says, I'm not going to do it unless the utility builds out significant renewable energy into this grid, that helps us move the needle. So that has been one of the most rewarding parts of this work, is to help drive that conversation. And I repeat that fact wherever I can to start to drill it into the minds of my colleagues in particular who aren't yet drawing that connection. We're still fighting this debate between it's either the environment or the economy. And of course, that's not true. It has to be both. We can't have one without the other. So I think, it's I look forward to that challenge. I wish it weren't such, wish we didn't have so much work ahead, but I do feel like at this moment, we'll be able to climb more quickly as we've built some solid baseline relationships, learn how to communicate better, not using the words climate change, but all of the other important things that we share in common to help us get to what really is a decarbonized economy.
That's great. I start with just using the language of my colleagues who have very different political values. So I use liberty a lot. You get people's attention. But I do a couple other things. If I talk about faith leadership, not necessarily my own, but faith leaders, my conservative colleagues will listen. If I talk about agriculture, my conservative colleagues will listen. And when I talk about business and entrepreneurship, my colleagues will listen. Those are entry points that I've had very good success with. Very good success. And I consider myself extremely progressive. I represent the bluest dot in the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I've been able to get a lot of stuff done despite the fact that my legislature has been dominated by Republicans for the vast majority of 3 decades. And I do that by building relationships and meeting people where they are in good faith. And people are always surprised in the blue bubble in which I live, how the heck do you do that? And so I drive an electric vehicle. And I'm the first to make fun of myself because I'm a stereotype behind a wheel, like the driving wheel. Like I represent all the things that a lot of conservatives like to make fun of, so I lean into that. So I joke at my own expense. I was late getting to a commerce hearing 5 hours away from me in Pittsburgh because there was no infrastructure for my EV between the state capital of Harrisburg and Pittsburgh. So when I got to Pittsburgh, late to this meeting, all of my colleagues on the Commerce Committee were joking, oh, your little electric vehicle didn't make it. And I said, well, actually, my car was fine. We just don't have the infrastructure. And I wound up going into rural districts like yours and spending a lot of time while my car was charging supporting your local businesses. Man, that got their attention. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, there was nothing on the turnpike, so I had to find random places to charge my vehicle, and I'm going to eat. I'm going to look around, I'm going to buy stuff in your district, a district I would never visit unless you invited me, because I had to charge my car. They stopped laughing and started scratching their head. They're like, Interesting. So I was able to connect dots in ways that they never thought about. It's simple to me because I need to charge my car and I will go anywhere to do it. So now that's a common point. I can say, hey, I was just in your district. And they really appreciate it because they're not used to that. So meeting people where they are, using their own language, and doing so in good faith has really done wonders. I didn't expect to get anything done. You see, I was elected the same night as what's his name in 2016. And my kids were crying. I was like, but I won. They're like, yeah, okay, anyway. And I joined the smallest Democratic caucus in 60 years in Pennsylvania. And I'm like, what did I just do? Like, was this a setup? Like, was this the worst decision of my life? Because now I'm going to be in a body where I can't do anything, where at the top, I have someone who may destroy our country. I'm like, how am I going to lead? How am I going to govern? But I found a way. So despite the extraordinary issues that we face in pink to the deep red states, there is opportunity. And also beyond the legislative process is the appropriations process. Am I right? So you can pass all the bills you like, but when it comes to distributing the funds, there's a lot of stuff that can happen in an extra legislative manner. And I'm working on something that I think could be hugely bipartisan, and maybe some of you have experience in this, but geothermal. It's the only, what's the right word? I'm going to make up another word today. Pre-politicized renewable energy, because it will be politicized at some point, but not yet. I don't hear conservatives talking bad about geothermal. And a lot of the technology and a lot of the workforce kind of wisdom comes from the same folks who have a background in fracking. And I'm no fan of fracking, but the technology is not inherently evil, right? It's what we do with any technology. And so when you're thinking about energy communities, and in Pennsylvania and like a lot of places across the country, coal is dying on the vine. I don't hear, and I represent a lot of tree huggers, and like I said, I am a tree hugger. I've never heard any of my tree hugging friends, neighbors, colleagues say, we need to ban coal. I've never heard that. Now I know people may be thinking that. A lot of people in Philadelphia don't even know that coal is still a thing. They say ban fracking. How many of you ever said, we need to ban fax machines? I see some people in the back like, what's a fax machine? Okay, you don't have to ban a fax machine, you just stop using them, right? So I say that to say that when we have the ability to convert to new opportunities in energy, we need to start in those communities that are most deeply affected, and some of those communities are in the most renewable hostile areas. But unless and until you engage them in good faith and show them another way, we're going to continue more of the same. And I know that this will work, and not because I'm an optimist, because just for full disclosure, I'm rather allergic to optimism. But I have friends who are optimists, and I love them dearly. Not to sound optimistic, I just want to tell you an example of how I know this will work. Is that fair? Can I do that? All right. All right, you'll allow it. Thank you, Claire. I appreciate that. So work with me here because I have ADD. Years ago, there was a fight in my neighborhood in Philadelphia against medical cannabis. We had just passed a law and we were working on creating dispensaries. And someone tried to bring a dispensary to my neighborhood just 4 blocks from my house. I was very excited, but a lot of the seniors in my community, in the majority black district that I represent, were very, very against it. They're like, why are they going to put this in our community? How dare they come in our community and put these things in our community? They need to take it somewhere else. And so a lot of them were little old ladies, who are my favorite demographic. I come from little old ladies. That's just my origin story. That aside, I asked one of them who was very, very vocal, have you been to a dispensary before? Because there were no dispensaries in Pennsylvania, so they would have only been able to visit them in other places, Colorado or wherever at the time. This is 2017. And they're like, no. And I said, would you like me to pick you up at your house and take you to one? And she was like, huh? I said, well, let's just go visit a new dispensary in the suburbs. It's about 15 minutes from our neighborhood. She's like, okay. So I picked her up at her house, and we drove to a dispensary. Now, raise your hand if you've been, I'm not saying you've used, have driven by a dispensary before. Okay, very interesting. Most people raise their hand for those of you at home. We showed up, we went inside, they were waiting for us, and the woman's face was like this. The place was beautiful. It looked like a luxury spa. It was gleaming and this and that, and people were nice and cheery, all that stuff. And it dawned on me, not only that she was impressed by this dispensary, but in her mind's eye, when I said dispensary, before that, in her mind's eye, she thought drug den. Drug den. She thought it's going to be folks on the ground and, rolling around and, all the worst things. So I say that to say that we can talk all we want. We can tell or we can show. If we show people a way and meet people where they are, they're going to be able to embrace a future where they can see themselves. And if we can do that for a little old example like that, I think we absolutely can do that as it relates to energy communities that politically are very opposed to a lot of these changes that may very well be in their best interest if they own it and understand it in their own way.
So just very quickly, what they're touching on is the language that you use really matters. And I will say I do a lot of bipartisan work, and the main thing is ask your colleagues across the aisle what they think about the policy. Ask them how you think it's going to impact their community. I come from the nonpartisan world, being a city council member, which inherently makes it so that you're doing bipartisan work. And at the end of the day, if people are willing to come to the table and solve problems and you can find commonality, focus on that commonality. Make sure that you are not dismissing Republicans out of hand to say that they don't believe in climate change, because what they do believe in is wildfires. They see flooding, they see drought, they see the impacts on their businesses, they see their workforce diminishing, and they see communities where their kids can't come back and live because there's no jobs for them there. So I think the more we talk about energy independence and innovation and the ability to draw the private sector into their towns and make their communities thriving places where their kids are going to want to come back and have their grandchildren there, those are the places where you really grab people at the heartstrings, because ultimately, as the late great Paul Wellstone would say, sometimes the right thing to do is also the strategic thing to do. And it's strategic to make sure that people, even if they don't agree with you, have been asked so that they feel that they have that level of respect, that you're not just dismissing them out of hand.
Great, thank you. We started a little bit late, so I'm going to be okay, great. I'm going to monopolize y'all, or we are. So I want to ask one more brief question, and then I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions of the legislators here. Coming back to this issue of it will be up to the states to implement this funding to the best climate purpose. What's the 30-second version of what are the pitfalls that states, local governments, or the federal government should avoid in implementing this money?
Only 30 seconds?
I'll give you 1 minute.
Yeah, we only get 30 seconds for that? So again, I would say part of it needs to be, instead of focusing on the big sexy headlines, focus on the implementable. So all of those things that are not sexy, like storm drainage, one of my favorite subjects. I love some stormwater management. Focusing on making sure that where we are creating additional built environment is related to where we're putting our transportation hubs, making sure that our planning documents at the local level reflect the goals of these policies. Those are all of these unsexy policy spaces that are going to be crucial to ensuring that we have climate policy and investments that are going to be able to give us a return and that are going to make it so that our communities are more resilient over time.
I'll do it 30 seconds. There are too many legislators who are operating from a place of willful ignorance. Yeah, I said it. Willful ignorance. There are too many of us in positions of power who don't actually know shit. Did I just say that out loud? Okay. So what that means is at the inflection point where we have to make the right decisions about how to do that, we need to be humble enough and do the work to listen to folks who have expertise who are not always at the table. Because we will implement things in an aggressively bad way. In an aggressively bad. I'm in a state that just approved throwing out wastewater, fracking water on dusty roads. That's a thing now in Pennsylvania. What could possibly go wrong? So that's what's happening. So we have to make sure, I don't know, imagine if there was an association, a national caucus, let's say, of environmentally minded legislators. I need to take a note. If there were an entity that existed, I'm just spitballing here, that brought together state legislators from all over the country and educated them and allowed them to, oh, wait a minute, that's what NCEL does, isn't it?
I'm shocked you forgot.
Yes, that's right. And actually learn for free all these things so that when it's time to implement, you're not going to do it in an aggressively stupid way. It's asking very little, but I don't know about you all. Sometimes I feel I'm surrounded by folks who, what's the word? You're not going to help me out here. I think I said willfully ignorant enough times. You get my point. I'm not being subtle here. Yes.
The one thing I'll add, this is a really tough act to follow, both of these two, but especially this guy. As a member of the super minority since that same fateful day you were elected, I have been, and frankly my whole career in the environmental field in Indiana, I have been a big proponent and advocate of coalition building and making sure that all those voices in our community that have the expertise on the different, maybe non-sexy parts of the opportunity in IREF for Indiana are empowered to make the right arguments to the right people at the right time in the State House. And that's frankly part of my role. I bring folks in to get to folks that I need to partner with across the aisle to get things done. And I think that really does help make a difference. Coalitions can be, unlikely partners oftentimes, right? When I talked about building the Electric Vehicle Product Commission out of the Climate Commission, that was reaching out to UAW and some non-union auto parts manufacturers and bringing folks together to do something that's going to help our environment significantly in Indiana.
Thank you. All right, I'm sure there are folks with questions out there. Could you please raise your hand? All right, I saw Susan first.
Thank you very much. This has been a great panel. I really appreciate it. So my name is Susan Hendershot. I run an organization called Interfaith Power and Light. So I appreciate the preaching going on up there. And we have state affiliates in all of your states. So my question for you is, how can we as activists and our communities on the ground where you all are, how can we help you move legislation forward and be more supportive to the efforts that you're making? Thank you.
Sure. You all are awesome. Yeah, I said it. I use you all in a very creative way, in the spirit of coalition building and bipartisanship. So if you're coming to raise some, get in some good trouble, which is what you all are known for, what I'll do is you'll come and I'll have you stand right outside of the House floor. And I say, okay, I'm going to bring legislators to you. You stay where you are. I'm going to bring them to you. And then I'll go up to some of my conservative colleagues who I have a decent relationship with, and I say, Representative, if you don't mind, there's a pastor here from your area. If you would, I'd really love to introduce you to her. So, oh, absolutely. I don't say what the issue is. And then he comes out and I introduce, great, you two talk, and then I go out, I get another legislator, and I keep doing that. Just the imprimatur of being a faith leader opens up opportunities. And it humanizes the issue and the people who are coming. Because you get to talk, not me, because they're going to listen to you actually more than they'll ever listen to me. And if you're from the area, if you may have the same faith, similar lived experiences, you then can create a narrative that can move things along much better than I could, because when they look at me, they see difference. But when I connect the dots between you and them, they see a connector, and that allows all kinds of opportunities beyond just energy or an environmental policy. And so it works both ways, and you all have been great in Pennsylvania.
So a couple of things. One, I just have to brag on Washington State for a second. In addition to our incredible absentee voting system, postage prepaid, thanks to the state legislature, encouraging young people to vote, registering young people to vote. Young people in the United States they're underrepresented at the polls and absolutely overrepresented in terms of numbers. So getting them out there, getting them involved, and helping enable them to write their legislators, to comment at hearings. And then the other thing I will say, bragging on Washington State, is because of COVID, we were the first legislature that went fully remote. And because we have now have that technology, we also have remote testimony. So instead of having to come to the Capitol, which for many people immediately disenfranchises them from being part of the process, you can come in your sweatpants from the privacy of your own home and let your voice be heard. So especially in your Washington State network, get those young people into hearings, make sure they're signed up to testify, and know that they don't even have to do oral testimony. They can just sign in pro, wishing to not testify, and it shows support for those issues. And I'll double down on what Chris said, which is matching up constituents that are germane to a particular representative that might not necessarily support your cause is a far better messenger to make sure that they're hearing from you rather than hearing from me.
Hey, thank you all for such an engaging talk. You're all incredible public speakers. I just want to start out. My name is Evan Raskin. I'm the National Campaign Manager for Earth Day in the United States. And our theme for this coming year is 2023, Invest in Our Planet, focused on how not only can we use climate investments as a form of avoiding the dangers that are posed by the way that our environment has been mismanaged for the last decades, or over a century rather, but indeed it can be the best path forward to building prosperity, to building happier, healthier, and wealthier communities. The Inflation Reduction Act is the financial mechanism through which we can invest in our planet. And I'd love to ask each of you, what are the best means of using these funds within your community to not only mitigate climate damages, but create prosperity, whether that be in terms of economics or public health or any other way in which real communities that you represent are going to be able to thrive in the future?
A couple of things I'll expand on. One, when I think about bike and ped connectivity, I was at a panel at Climate Week with some mayors from some lower income communities who talked about how there was a lot of fear about that investment coming into their community. It was like the idea would be that we'd be building trails for other people to use, not for them. And to really make sure there's communication and understanding that it's really that the idea is to connect the neighborhoods to jobs and their churches and their schools and to that health outlet that is biking and walking. obviously the public health impact disproportionate in our lower income communities. So that's something that I'd like to see us really leverage with the IRA dollars as we move forward with our. We have a Trails Caucus today in Indiana, but I think we can begin to expand it to have this broader conversation. You know what? I had another point and I've already lost it, so I'm going to hand it off to Chris.
That's a great question. I'm really into social impact entrepreneurship. And, you know, for those of you who don't know, the triple bottom line, people, profit, planet, you know. And there could be an awakening among an entrepreneurial class that's committed to climate action, to environmental justice, to social equity. The funds that could be used creatively, the sky's the limit. And creating in this subset of the business sector of folks who've been on the margins of the workforce, margins of the business community, who can create green collar jobs in communities where folks are thankful for some of the most predatory businesses because they at least create new jobs, but they're not good jobs, and they're extractive in nature. We have the ability to actually envision a type of subset of the entrepreneurial class that is deeply rooted in social and environmental justice, and the funding is there to do it. That's something that not enough legislators on the state or local, state, and federal level understand. That's something near and dear to my heart. It's what I used to teach at Temple University. But I think that is a sleeping giant that has extraordinary potential.
Can I just add one last thing? I think that ultimately climate justice, racial justice, and poverty reduction have to be wedded together in order for all of this to work. So I think everything that we can be investing in that ensures that everyday people's bottom line in terms of their bills for water, for electricity, for food is reduced. And I think any investment that we can be making in that area to ensure that we are making it easier for people to survive and thrive and hopefully build wealth so that their next generation is better set than they were themselves.
Absolutely. And I thank you. I think a really good example of that, if I'm just going to take a moderator's point of privilege here, is actually Pennsylvania, the homes program that, so Pennsylvania, inspired by, it sounds like the federal government, created a program specifically focused on building weatherization for folks who are living in subsidized housing and that need more access to affordable housing. And that's a really great case where we see having an impact on climate change and reducing emissions from buildings goes hand in hand with people being comfortable, safe, and healthy in their own homes. And that money is now, one of the things in the IRA is the IRA has a dedicated fund to help states create their own similar homes programs so they can receive that money and direct building and home weatherization money towards the folks who most need it. So that's...
Oh, also, you got, I just want to point this out. The person who got that done, who led the effort in the state Senate, is a new senator, Senator Nikhil Saval from Philadelphia, who is very progressive. I believe it passed unanimously. Unanimously. That's not a word that we even understand in Pennsylvania. I have to come to Egypt to say that word. So the fact that it happened, the fact that it was bipartisan, it was unanimously supported, and was introduced by a progressive senator of color from Philadelphia is like watching a leprechaun ride a unicorn. That's how rare it is. So if for those optimists in the audience, there's some real stuff happening here. So I'm so glad you reminded me of that because it almost was like a dream. I can't believe it happened. And that is... It did. It did indeed happen, yes.
We have to keep talking about it because it did, and it's a great example for other states. I think we maybe have time for one more question. One more question from Gaia.
Hi, my name is Addie. I'm with Gaia. Thank you for the work that y'all do. So as you mentioned earlier, the fossil fuel industry is promoting expensive, unproven, and polluting false solutions like CCS and chemical recycling, which is really just burning plastic. Actually, 2 of your states, Pennsylvania and Indiana, have state-level laws which facilitate the expansion of these facilities, which are just going to cause further pollution, further environmental injustice, and it would be really devastating, especially as a young person, if our federal funds are used for these kinds of false solutions. So I guess I'm just wondering, what are you guys going to do as state legislatures to make sure that these funds do not go towards these kinds of dangerous projects?
Well, that's the toughest question, right? So we are going to have, because I don't have enough sway to stop it, and we have no campaign finance laws in Indiana either. We have some of the most gerrymandered maps in the nation. So we will have some significant investment in green or blue hydrogen in Northwest Indiana, and we'll see how that comes out and how good or bad that work is for the environment. So what I have to do is focus on building as much support to continue to build out more renewables in Indiana, more battery storage in Indiana, more sustainable infrastructure, and when politically the people of Indiana want to see things get better, we can make progress on that front. We're not going to make progress on that front right now. The Republicans are in control, and they are very committed to a major hydrogen hub in Northwest Indiana that I do not believe will have any green elements as far as green hydrogen goes in the current iteration.
My response is a little different. I was inspired to be a part of a direct action the summer of 2020, where one of the youngest members of the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania led this action towards police accountability. She's now heading to Congress as our first black woman in Congress representing Pennsylvania, Summer Lee. And I was really proud to work with her in shutting down the House of Representatives and demanding immediate legislative action around police accountability. Direct actions work. Direct actions work. And there are going to be people on both sides of the aisle who are not going to be as well educated or do the right thing around the things that you talk about that are so deeply impacting your generation. So, we got to shut it down. There are going to be direct actions that have to happen on the outside, because all the things that young people did during the summer of 2020, you all made an influence to those of us on the inside to shut it down legislatively. We literally shut down the House of Representatives. It had never happened since Benjamin Franklin, who was our first Speaker of the House. We got it done because we're inspired by your generation. Your generation. So if you don't like it, you organize and you inspire those folks like me who are in positions of power on the inside, because it's worked. It's always worked. And when people say it doesn't work, they're lying to you. It has always worked. Understand that. You make a difference. Your generation is extraordinary. And we have to understand that all generations have to work together. And sometimes those of us who are in an older generation need to be followers. Because the way we are successful is we followed your generation. We were inspired by what you did and previous generations to do the right thing. So there are going to be things that are going to, where there are going to be folks who should be voting the right way and speaking up who aren't. And you have to hold them to account too.
I just hope Washington can set the template for how the other states do it. I'll leave it at that.
That's a great point. Look at what Washington State has been doing recently. There's been a lot happening. So yes, kudos to you, Senator Loveland. And I'll, again, as I close us out with my moderator's point of privilege, just mention, energy policy is really complicated. And yet, we know what the solutions are. We have the technical capacity to switch to renewables to make that transition. It's a political issue. But it's also an issue where people feel intimidated to stand up to their utilities, They feel intimidated to get to understand the differences between all the different potential uses of hydrogen, and might have heard from fossil fuel interests about particular technologies that are still fossil fuels and still toxic to our climate. And so what we have tried to create here with NCEL, and what I'm so thrilled to have these leaders here with us to talk about, is the power there is in peer learning together by these legislators and learning from each other about what the best practices are. And the solutions that work in Indiana are going to be different from the ones that work in Washington and in Pennsylvania, but they'll be appropriate to the context, and we'll find a way, and we're together for implementation, as the COP27 slogan is. So thank you all for being here and for your questions and for your climate work. No excuses. It's time to deliver on high climate ambition, and we'll close it at that. Thanks.